Hello, my name is Greg Williams, and I've been a friend of Doug Conkle's since basically elementary school all the way on. We've kept in touch throughout the years. Obviously, we live in different geographic places, but he is a person that once you know him and get his humor, because he has a Doug Conkle dry sense of humor, but it is a wonderful sense of humor. He's had that his whole life, all the way from elementary school on. He will be missed. I know that he's been working at the synagogue for many years. So hopefully, fair winds and following seas, as I say in the Navy, even though I served in the Air Force. That's what you say to your next job. But I know you're roasting him, so you're saying goodbye, and it is going to be, obviously you will miss him. So let's talk. It is a roast, so we're going to talk a little bit about Doug and what I know about him since he was of a young age. We both played Little League Baseball for a team on the Fort Walton Beach League. It was Jimmy's Men and Boys Store, and it was a pawn shop, basically. And Doug and I would play in the most important positions on the field if you want to say that keeping away from the ball was the most important. So that gave Doug plenty of time to watch and observe games and to comment on it, which is, as you know, his passion. So they would put either Doug or I, or sometimes, same times we would be in the outfield, right field, center field, maybe rover, going different places. And sometimes left field. It was a left-handed hitter, keep away from the ball. But we had plenty of time, or at least he had plenty of time to look at the game and comment on what was happening. Meanwhile, the two girls that were the only two girls on the teams at that time frame, this is probably 7, 8 years old, were my twin sister, Kim Williams, who was very good, as well as the other girl was Melissa Fisher, now Dr. Melissa Fisher, who was also extremely good. They would be in the positions of first base, third base, shortstop, and pitching, while Doug and I were on the outfield. So plenty of time to comment about how the game was going and then the other things that were going on with the game. That was the first story. The second story is Doug and Gary Scalfano, which you may have heard from earlier today, Dr. Gary Scalfano and his wife, Dr. Laura Scalfano. At the time, they were not married, but they came up for our wedding. So Doug, Gary, and Gary's Laura came up for the wedding in Pennsylvania outside of Valley Forge, which is really basically outside of Philadelphia. So, 30, 45 minutes outside of the city. And we had a wonderful wedding there, and we were very happy to have them come up. We did tell them, since my wife is of a Hungarian descent, that the drinks that were served at the German-Hungarian Club were pretty strong. So everybody knew about it, but Doug came up with a good one-liner that day. He says, being at the reception after the wedding was like being at a geriatric frat party. It was pretty intense. Meanwhile, everybody had a good time. I think Doug, Gary, and Laura were at table 20, so they had pledges to get to their table. It was such a fun table. And then when the evening was done, my dad, who was a driver of all of them, he was bringing my twin sister, the one you just heard about, who, oh, God bless her, was wearing a long dress that day because she was in the wedding party. One of the probably 4 or 5 times I've seen her wear a dress. And they were driving back to the hotel, which is probably 20 to 30 minutes away from there. Back in that time frame, before cell phones or smartphones and Google Maps and those kind of things, how did you get to places? You had an atlas, you knew your directions, and you had probably a hand-drawn the directions from the church to the reception to the hotel, back to the home address of Margie's parents at the time. That's probably all they had. And then my dad, who is unfortunately the person who would leave in the fourth quarter of a tied football game just because he wanted to beat the traffic, decides to leave early. And grudgingly, Gary, Doug, and Laura were in the back as they were driving home. And of course, my dad at night, maybe not the best sense of directions. During the daytime, great, not at night. And they ended up from Valley Forge, outskirts of suburbs of Philly. Next thing you know, they're in downtown Philly. He made some wrong turns. Thankfully, he didn't go across in New Jersey, but there's many tollways, one-way roads, etc. And somehow they ended up there. And my dad is stopping at gas stations, requesting my twin sister in her long gown to go out and get directions. So she was not happy either. Meanwhile, on the back, the three happy people, and especially with Doug and his one-man stand-up comedy routine, he's having a good time and everybody's laughing. And I think steam was coming out of my dad's ears from the description of my sister. So meanwhile, when they're trying to go from point A to point B to get back to the hotel from downtown Philly, I think they passed, unfortunately, a homeless person for the second time. And Doug says, I think we've passed this homeless person, so we're going around in circles. So he was indeed true. It was a true fact maybe not the best thing to be said at the time, especially when there's no Ubers or maybe even a taxi wouldn't take you back if Doug would have got it booted out. But thankfully, he decided to stop the comedy show and they got back safely. But Doug, I know the synagogue people that work at the synagogue are going to miss you. You're a wonderful friend. Everybody's going to love you wherever you're going to next. And I hope you have a good roast. Cheers.